for making sure that it doesn't interfere with the microphones. That would be very nice. The restrooms are obviously over there. I think everyone found that. And during the coffee break, again, for those who are with us in the room today, we'll be serving coffee and snacks. And you will have the opportunity to take a sneak peek, first-hand view at our new product, which we're going to be launching in Q4, the Apida API control plane over there. That'll be an opportunity you don't want to miss, right? So with that, real quick, we have set a packed agenda, starting with a welcome note by our CEO, Dr. Puschke. We'll have 2 customer sessions, 2 exciting customer talks about projects that you have implemented with our help, of course. The first one will be about Peter Tubak from our customer Messe München here from Germany. We have a second session later then in the agenda, the last one from the top, from the bottom here, excuse me, from our customer William Hill in the UK. And the other sessions we're going to have, we have Markus Müller, our CTO, who will be talking about distributed and federated API management, give us an introduction in a set what's coming as well, where we're heading, where the industry is heading. We are really glad to have our friends from Broadcom with us today. So we'll have Aaron White, the global head of product management from Broadcom, giving us an update on the Layer 7 roadmap and an update. And he will also participate in a roundtable session on API Ops, which we'll then have thereafter. And we're also glad to have Gary Vermeulen with us from Broadcom, platform architect for Layer 7, who will be talking about transitioning from appliance-based implementations of the gateway to containerized gateways. All right. So with that, and with no further ado, let me introduce you to our first speaker, Dr. Detlef Puschke, CEO of Apida.
Okay.
Detlef, please.
All of them met me already, so thanks a lot for your introduction so far, your friendly one. So today it's all about APIs, and if you can please do me a favor and start with the first slide of my presentation. And it's all about the fact that API is a journey. What we experienced together this morning, sometimes it's bumpy. Of course, when you are dealing with Apida, it's always a smooth exercise, an API, I would say, project or program. But today my role is somehow to set the scene, what's going on in the industry, how we are going to understand that, what's our vision at least as well, how we are going to master API management, and how we are going to contribute to the, I would say, API industry, and of course to the technology. That is what drives us, because we are a technology company. We like to code. We like to turn code into a solution, into a sustainable one. That's what we do. And yeah, when it comes to API management, already you had the latest and the greatest, I would say, slogan, call it like that, or call it the buzzword, and that's about federated API management. I like that federation because when it comes to, I would say, a state, or when it comes to something, a federation is always an extremely resilient and extremely reliable mechanism. So therefore, federated API management, that is something we have to deal with. What we as well strongly believe, and all I'm going to say is derived from more than 100 mission-critical API projects. So that's not something like a sudden we came to the conclusion that this is the latest and the greatest. No, what we are going to present to you here is about down-to-earth lessons learned we took from our API experience, so to speak. And point number 2 is that is, and I do believe that's I'm running through open doors, or in other words, goes without saying that API and automation, they go together like a horse and a carriage. They belong together even. An API without automation is like sailing on a boat without any wind, on a sailboat without any wind. API first approach, that's another typical shop floor exercise and shop floor, I would say, theme, particularly for innovative companies, to say nothing about those who are at the moment in the middle of API transitions. API business value mining, we are going to explain that later, because what we see now with all the citizen developers, with all the speed we are going to see in the industry, that they want to come up with a mobile solution, they want to come up with a certain application, that citizen development again is there, and you have to deal with, I would say, a jungle of different tools. In other words, sometimes you can say it's tool sprawl. And yet you have to again sue that or turn the jungle into a zoo, fence it, and make sure that in the end it works sustainably. And yes, that is what's particularly technology is in. It's all about speeding up the value chain, speeding up the innovation to value cycle, speeding up the innovation to cash cycle. That is what we see, and particularly APIs are instrumental. They are really essential for this. So mission critical for a successful API management program. That is what's about. That is what drives us as APEDA since 5 years now. So we started our journey, our API journey as a team, 2017 all together, is that we are in urgent need of an integrated API architecture. That of course, and we are so proud of really having these operational experts coming. Let me say that somehow a little bit, I would say funny, really having this machine room experience, the heavy lifting machine room experience wins. Can I say so? That is for us so important, that we do really understand what we are going to deal with in all the major flavors. And yeah, that is what we say as well, that it's about a product, an API, and you for sure join me, an API is a product. And when it comes to a product, then at least German manufacturing techniques, German engineering techniques should be applied together with Japanese was Kaizen, Phoenix project, all this. So it's about a manufacturing approach. API has to become a product, so therefore lean management is key. That is what we see, and we try to combine that all together, because there is at the moment a tendency that you have to deal with different ecosystems. It goes without saying that Layer 7 is one of the front runners, one of the most resilient, one of the most robust API gateway or proxy technologies. That goes without saying, but right now they are growing like hell. I just heard yesterday that there was another Series B of 30 million for a real-time API streaming company. So this is crazy how this market is going to evolve in these days. And that is the reason why we, as well as APEDA, why we started turning our experience into a model. What does that mean, into a model? Or you can even say into a mechanism. And that's the reason why we are going to introduce today. Can give you a sneak preview. Unfortunately, our colleagues from KPMG could not make it today because he is ill. It's in a sanity check with KPMG as we speak, and as well with Gartner. So we are going to introduce a value model for that. Not only a total cost of ownership value, it's more. It's a comprehensive end-to-end value model where we believe a return on API mechanism can make the difference. What's good, and that is for us as well, because we are somehow, I would say, a pretty unique company in a way that we always try to advance the course. So we are not purely focusing on APIs and technology alone and the latest technology stack. 5 minutes only. We are really looking what the others are doing. KPMG, I mentioned already, we closely work together with Gartner. There's a very simple explanation for that, because we want to go for the US now, and Gartner is key, particularly when it comes to the US market. HCL, Boston Consulting, you name them. So we are in a good company. When it comes to strategic API management, we are in a good company. And that is the reason why we are going to build our company this way. And of course, we are going for open source cloud initiatives, and Catena X to highlight that. That's the digital value chain for automotive suppliers and the automotive industry around the globe. That's an initiative is going to be established as we speak. And Markus sits on a technology supervisory board, somehow making sure that all the API ideas we are going to develop are taking into consideration. Yeah, and that's our contribution. So we try to combine that into a business model. So when it comes to a dual plane architecture, we try to combine the control plane and the portal technology, particularly the admin portal and the development portal. We do have, and that's what makes us extremely proud, thanks of you guys, really thanks of you. We do have a second to none NPS. NPS stands for, let me say it in other words, customer satisfaction index. Nobody else in the industry has that, I would say, high score of 55. We do have as well an API fabric, which is an open innovation approach, because API management is a collaborative exercise. So you are no longer a supplier. Of course, to a certain extent you are, but you are a partner. You are a collaborative co-engineer of your clients. And that is what we try to really deploy and to develop going forward. And when it comes to layer 7, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, here it's speak loudly, but when it comes to the global deployment of layer 7, I would say mission critical, heavy lifting implementations, it's about us. There is nobody else in the world with such a broad and deep skill, particularly when it comes to layer 7, particularly when it comes to the so-called operational. And yeah, we do have a self-assessment to start. We can give you a quick preview this afternoon so that you have a point, a certain roadmap, so to speak, to start your API journey. So we do have developed a model, which is a comprehensive 80 questionnaire, and you can take it from there forward and then do it in a regular health check, regular value management mechanism mode of operation. That brings me to a slide we are extremely proud of, because having a roadmap is about attending your clients lifetime long, delivering value lifetime long. So customer lifetime value, and that is what makes us different from a pure technology player, where usually somebody is throwing a piece of software over the fence. No, we are in it till the end, till it works, till it is really creating the appropriate value. That is what it is about. And this is just a couple of, I would say, a couple of very interesting examples. And I don't know whether now they removed, by the way, NASA. I don't know whether Jackie is in the call today. I don't know whether Jackie from NASA is on the call. He is not, because I want to ask him where he positions himself. But this is pretty interesting that at least when it comes to our view on APIs, when you are trying to combine business value and a certain degree of intelligent API dynamics, because APIs has a different flavor, as we all know. And the world is more and more event-driven. The world is more and more real-time. The world is more and more going towards this so-called event-driven business models. And that is what we would like to support as well. So we do have a couple of very interesting examples, and today we are going to concentrate on two. I would say when it comes to heavy lifting again, to mention that, it's William Hill, because that is something where a so-called transformation towards an AWS has been made. Kubernetes was in the center, and it's still from a performance point of view in the neighborhood of a couple of billion peak performance, couple of billion calls per day. That is something where we are really talking about 90 plus gateways in parallel being orchestrated. That's something where layer 7 is the best tool you can buy on the world when it's coming to, I would say, real peak performance, mission critical business. And as well, and that is for us very interesting, because now we are talking about business, that particularly Messe München was able to transform, I would say somehow on a short notice, due to this little animal we call COVID-19, this little one, we're able to transform the entire, it is still the largest automotive fair in the world, or can we say so? So we're able to put the largest automotive fair in the world online. The project was done in a more collaborative manner. We all together choose layer 7 as a technology platform. And in the end, it was a good decision because we are going to generate real added value. And this is something where it's about to monetize. And that is what we say the primary discipline about, to monetize the APIs and generate competitive advantage. And you already mentioned that we went for an award for this. And globally, we were able to be really nominated, and we are amongst the last 3 or something like that. Let's see. Maybe we are going to hear later. That brings me to my last one, because I like pictures, as you know, and that is when it comes to the combination between Broadcom layer 7 and Apida. That's what we do. We're putting really the rocket and the turbo on top of layer 7. And cut a long story short, together we go extremely strong. I do believe you can finally confirm that as well. But for us is really the case, because we don't want to go fast. we want to go sustainable. So we want to go far together. And that's the reason why we are very, very much looking forward for all those customers around the globe listening what API management is about, for all those customers who take, let me say, a layer 7 modernization, a layer 7 optimization into account. This is the right team to speak with. I am very much looking forward. Do me a favor, be as interactive as possible for today. It's about learning, it's about experience, it's about lessons learned. And I do hope that we do have a fruitful session till 6 o'clock. And then as well, having the one and the other light German beer together next to this venue. Thanks a lot for your audience so far. And Armin, stage is yours again.
Thank you very much, Detlef, for the welcoming note. It's really interesting to see, I think, where we want to be together with you, our customers, our partners, and where we think how we fit in to the picture. Now, it's a real pleasure for me to introduce you to our first customer session, our first customer speaker. Let me welcome on stage Peter Tubak, Head of Application Development for Messe München, who will be talking about the project that you've just heard about. Grace, the one API for the exhibition industry, right?
Yes.
Peter, over to you.
Thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Please choose one. Thank you very much for having me here. It's pretty crazy to make a hybrid event for me, because for some years where this whole pandemic started, I was architect at Messe München, and one of my tasks was to create or to help to create a digital platform to be able to stream events, because because of the pandemic we had to cancel events, we had to postpone events, but we wanted to give something to our customers. And we saw, of course, that it's not as easy. You have to build up a platform, you have to give data to the different kind of application, you have to integrate, you have to exchange information, and somehow you have to solve this whole problem within a relatively short time frame. So that was the problem to solve, and that was where we was lucky that we had layer 7 on board and Apida, because we know that we have the infrastructure to do this, but we have to do somehow, we have to implement it somehow. So what we saw that during this exercise, we saw that there are a lot of different kinds of data model. All of the platforms have something different. The definition of objects is a little bit different. Customer, exhibitor, visitor, all have different kind of attributes. The protocols used by the different implementations are really different. So how to combine them, how to integrate them, not to talk about security risks or all of these GDPR requirements you have to solve, where to store the consent of the customers, how to deal with security issues, or how to exchange one component because of a customer need. We don't want to use Zoom, or we would like to use Vimeo, how to exchange this data. So there are a lot of questions to be solved, and we think that we can do this by standardizing how we exchange data within the event industry and how we use the data, how we model the data. So what we did, we created our Grace project. Grace stands for Generic REST API for Consumer Entities. So we decided to create something what's generic, what's useful for all of the event industry players, for all of the platforms, for all of the solution providers. We decided to use REST because it's modern, it's actual, it's used by most of the players out there, and we do it for our consumers because we have third-party applications using our data, we have third-party solution providers using our data, So we are creating it not for ourselves, but for our consumers. So, and we decided as well that we would like to have it in a generic way, that it is, it could be used by all of the exhibition industry, because that's the main idea. That's our main goal, to have something standardized and introduce it at the platform providers, and then be able to exchange data within this whole industry, easy and fast. Behind this grace, we created a reference architecture, because as you can expect, we have a lot of internal systems, a lot of systems dealing with data, from online registration through ticket shops or our web shops, or just when we think about how this whole Grand Fair is planned and filled with exhibitors, there's a lot of data created in a lot of different kind of specific applications. We have somehow standardized this information. That's why we created a standardized database. We are moving all of this interesting data for our customers, interesting data in this standardized database, and we provide this data through a gateway to be able to manage the security concerns and to be able to give different kind of access level to this information. The APIs or the API endpoints are realizing or providing the data like standardized objects like exhibitors, ticket events, all of these standard business objects that we are using in our environment. The idea is that we provide this information to third parties like gastronomy, like hotels, or like product manufacturing companies, because if you just think about that, if we have an event, if we have a trade fair with hundreds of thousands of visitors, then somehow we have to be able to manage the visitors, where they will sleep, how they will travel through the city, how they can get to the fairground, or what they will just eat. We have to have enough supply on the Grand Fair. So these are valuable information for our partners, for our customers, and we have to provide this information to be able to provide necessary planning information. For example, that's one use case. But if you think about that, we would like to provide information to our visitors, what kind of events will be there on the fairground, which exhibitors are there, which products from the exhibitors, and so on and so forth. These are informations we have to provide on our websites. So there are a lot of use cases where we can use an API, and that's why after creating this reference architecture, we implemented the following way. We tried to choose the best-in-class components to have very stable and a solution that can be reproduced pretty easily. Because our idea is that other companies like Messe München may be able to create such a solution based on our reference architecture. So that's why we decided to use PostgreSQL as an open source database for providing the data. We chosen Layer 7 as one of the best solution for API management. And of course, at the back, we have our existing applications with our existing middleware. They are providing the information, they are aggregating the information. And at the point of PostgreSQL, we are talking about the standard solutions. The implementation is currently used by many consumers. One of our best consumers, of course, our own websites. We are providing event information. We are providing exhibitor information on our websites. we can provide information to third-party applications. The third-party applications can decide whether they cache the data, they store the data, or they put the data on request. And we are in planning phase with two other consumers. One is the Hofbräuhaus München, because for them is pretty interesting to have basic information about the upcoming visitor numbers, because then they know, do we have to create more beer, or it's enough what we have till now? Or for Flughafen München, it is inevitable to have information about the upcoming visitor numbers. Pretty interesting is Sell and Pick, because they provide marketing intelligence for producing firms. So that's why it's really interesting for us to show in which direction this contribution will go, because there are a lot of industries they are depend on Messe München or on the exhibitors, on the visitors, and such a data aggregator could help us and could move us forward. So that's pretty interesting to check how the development will go on here. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, and now some words about how we did this, or how Apida helped us create this solution. One of the main challenge during this development phase was how to move the code between the environments, how to deploy or publish the APIs to the production environment. It's pretty easy. We create it in our dev environment, then we push it to the test environment, it will be tested there, and then we push it to the production environment that we work there. But it wasn't as easy as we thought. There were a lot of challenges, and we had to find a solution which helps us, because it's not the best way to have this configuration, this developed code in an application, but then somehow export it, import it, and how to store it, and how to do the versioning. And that was pretty crazy. So that's why we looked into the market, and then we talked with Apida as well, how to do this, how to solve this. And that was really great that Apida had this solution for us, had this product for us, because right now what we can do with the Apida solution, we can easily export the created code, store it in Git. All of our code is in Git, not just the configuration layer, but the stored procedures in PostgreSQL, the database configuration, everything. So everything can be handled with a standard way, how we store the information in Git. And what is good, we can easily push the modification of the new code from environment to environment. So it's pretty easy to move forward, to move the developed code to the test environment, provide the test environment for the QA team, and then if everything goes well, then to deploy the information to the production environment. But it was important for us because we are working in different teams. We have development team, we have QA team, we have operations team, and all of the teams has to be able somehow to reproduce the environment, to recreate the environment, or just simply deploy the new code in a production environment. So that's why it was really great to have this solution. And of course, there are additional plus services if in case of we have to roll back or switch somehow the deployed code, then we can do this now, or we can easily create seamless processes through our development and operation line. That was one point, how our processes are better now, but not just the processes are better, but our cost structure is optimized as well, because we are now able to have standard blocks, standard building blocks, and we can reuse these components. When we are creating an API, it's really easy for us because we are just creating the schema in the database, we're creating the stored procedures, and then we are applying the standard building blocks in layer 7. And that's how we can easily create new APIs or easily modify all of the APIs, because the building blocks are standardized in this whole API universum. That's one major point, but the other major point, as most of the IT companies today or IT departments, we have a high fluctuation, so we have to have onboarding processes. And again, the solution and the standardization helps us to create better onboarding processes, a better experience for our developers. So it's easier them to understand what we are doing, how we are doing, and to get on board to create new code. And for operations, there are features as well. They are better now in bug finding. They are enabled to have better processes through the operation. Yeah, backup and recovery, as we all know, it's inevitable and important for operation. So the next steps. Right now, we are in the middle of creating the second version of our GRACE. The first version was created during the automotive trade fair, and we learned a lot. We did a lot of mistakes, but we learned a lot. That's why now we started over. We are creating the second version of this whole API platform to be able to have a better, standardized way for our upcoming projects, like 365 platform solution, or for other digital products. But we see, if we are creating standard APIs, then we can reduce the time to market as well. That's our major learning. Right now, what we see, we have started with one project, with one platform, and if another project comes and says, yeah, we would like to use the data, the similar data, then we can, okay, it's no problem, just register yourself on our developer platform, and then you will get all of the information. You will get the APIs, test cases, and everything that's needed for a developer. Through this whole standardization, we think that we will be able to create a better user experience, customer experience, because the different kind of touch points are using the same APIs, the same data structure, the same models. That's why we are pretty sure that having a standard data structure, having a standard API will allow to create standardized, not standardized solutions, but solutions they are interchangeable, and they are able to communicate with each other. And we think that there is a chance to monetize our data because we can create aggregated information. So we are not planning to sell the exhibitor data or the visitor data, but the aggregated data, the generated data based on behaviors, or based on just when we say how many visitors on a given location. These are information, they are useful and can be monetized. So to have this idea implemented and solved, and to move this standardization forward, we want to tell, of course, everybody that this API exists and how they can use it and how we created it, because we think that will be something that helps our industry to move forward. Thank you very much for your attention, and if there are any questions please feel free to ask. Peter, please.
Business to business and business to consumer data when you also expose the APIs?
What we are doing, we are creating standardized filtering in our APIs. At design time, we are identifying which attributes are relevant for this filtering, and then we create this whole policies like they are able to use the attributes as a filter criterion. And if you are implementing like this way, then it's just a parameter, is B2B or B2C information, and then you can filter it through all of the APIs. So the key point is to have these filter criteria at design time and then implement it in all of the APIs. They are involved in this question.
Okay, thank you. And another question is, there was a rumor about an award. Anything about this one?
Yeah, that's right. So last week, we had a presentation in Paris. So the whole process was a little bit different. So there is a UFI, organization for trade fair companies in the world, and in this organization has different kind of working groups for marketing, for digital innovation, and so on as forth. And digital innovation had an award. You can apply to this award by describing some kind of innovative or some kind of creative project. And we did this with Grace. We finished in the top 3. That's why we had that presentation last week in Paris. And at the end, we finished at 2nd place. But what's more important is that the feedback was really great. And the feedback was that, yeah, we have to move forward, we have to be on track, and we have to involve more and more industry player, because that's the way forward. That's what we need for event industry.
Then congratulations to the second
Thank you very
place,
much.
to Silver Star, right?
Any other
All right.
questions?
Excellent. Yeah, just as a reminder, if there are questions online, please just raise your hand virtually. Just use that raise your hand button, or ask the question in the chat, please. And in the meantime, are there any more questions in the room here? To Peter.
Yes, please.
Just 1 second.
I have a quick question. So
It's okay.
you can hear that. When you say the layer 7 gateway is in front of the PostgreSQL
Yes.
database, how are the calls? Obviously, you have an API call, REST call coming in. Are you making JDBC calls to the Postgres
Yes,
database
exactly.
for your APIs? Okay.
Exactly. We try to create a pretty straightforward and easy implementation, because when we can overcomplicate it for sure, but to have an easy and straightforward solution helps us to create a faster and transparent API. So even bug finding is easier if you have just these 2 layers. Even the development time is reduced, that we creating more logic at database side, and even to find developer is easier, because it's something standard to create stored procedures, to create database side logic, and that has helped us to move forward faster.
Let me just ask, are there any questions online? All right. Any more questions in the room to Peter? You just grab the mic. Wonderful.
You said, you're creating one interface, standardized interface. Now the question is, you have big business to business customers. Do they get all the same information or the same source or same API, or do you create APIs for a specific B2B customer?
Yeah, that's a good question. Before Grace, we created different kind of APIs. That's true. With Grace, we are trying to move in this direction that we have the standard APIs, and if there should be some kind of small modification because of a big player or because of some kind of business need, then we try to create an additional version or maybe analyze a little bit more this business requirement and to fit it in this solution somehow. Because for us, because of maintenance, because of code maintenance and development time, it's easier to have one solution. But yeah, we won't be able to always to use this standard API. So then we decided that we have the Grace as a cluster of APIs, and then we will create one more cluster within our API infrastructure. So that's how we try to divide the specific solutions. They will be put in this different kind of cluster, and all of the standards will be held in the Grace cluster, and that gives us the separation of standardized and business-driven development.
Thank you.
Yeah, meanwhile, we have a question online, which is, do you use one API gateway or a cluster to handle all of the API calls?
Yeah, in test and development environment, we have one API gateway. In production environment, we have a cluster. In development time, in test time, availability is not so important. It's important, but not so important as in production environment. That's why we have in production environment cluster. It's working great. So we will still have this infrastructure in the future.
All right, thank you very much. And a second question, which is, have you considered integrating GraphQL layer into the API?
Yeah, very good question. Yes, we analyze whether we should go in this direction or just stick at the Grace implementation what we defined. And the end of the analysis was GraphQL is okay, great, but for us now it would be too much because of development time, because of development costs, and maybe not all of our partners is ready to use that. So that's why we stick to a simpler solution, and in the future we might experiment with GraphQL.
Considering to move, edit. Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Peter,
Thank you
for
very
a
much.
very exciting presentation. And again, congratulations on a very successful project.
Thanks.
Right? Thank you so much for having me here.
Thanks.
All right. So with that, we'll do a quick bio break. We'll continue our session at 5 minutes past the hour. See you then. Thank you. All right, so we'll continue our session with a presentation by my colleague and good friend, Markus Müller, our CTO, who will be talking about patterns of API environments, basically. We'll be talking about distributed API management and the new upcoming notion of federated API management. So with no further ado, Markus, please, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Armin. Yeah, so when it comes down to the interactions with our customers, what we often find is that while API management and API management architectures are quite straightforward, what a lot of people are lacking are just the right words. Like, how do you call this kind of architecture? How do you call that kind of architecture? Is there a solution for X, Y, Z? And so that is why we decided to put a little educational talk in here as well. So it just makes working with each other much easier if you speak the same language, if everybody knows what the other one is talking about. So we are looking at some very basic API management architectures, on their pros, on their cons, and especially, as Armin said, the notions of distributed API management and federated API management. These are not so well known in the market right now, but these will be two words or two names that you will read a lot of more in the future. So to get started, if you could advance one slide because the presenter doesn't like me. What we have is we have multi-plane architectures, and that is not limited to API management in any form. These can be found in network management. These can be found in other parts of the IT landscape. And the basic idea here is that you have a separation of duty, right? So you don't put everything into one layer. You look at what layer needs what knowledge, and then you form parts of what you have to do. So for example, in the management plane is everything where you don't really need to know any technical details, right? So you have analytics like how often is that API used, how is it used, which endpoints are used. You have stuff like access policies. So who is allowed to access what? This is a question that can be answered without knowing any technical detail at all. And of course, you have some global configuration that can be made. Now, one level below that, we have the control plane. And that takes care of making sure that the actual execution is configured correctly. It looks at security, it looks at traffic shaping. So how does your traffic flow? Is it orchestrated the right way? Do you have rate limiting? Do you have throttling? All of these things take place in the control plane. And down below, we have the data plane. That is where actually the data is moved. This is where the bytes are processed. So for API management, this is where the requests are actually handled. This can be in the cloud, this can be on-prem, but this is where the action happens. Now, these first two planes, the management plane and the control plane, those two are tightly coupled. And with a lot of systems, usually those two planes are just expressed as one. Then you just talk about dual plane architecture and you end up with the upper plane and the lower plane, or as we will be using in our naming, the control plane and the data plane, right? So this is a very typical IT architecture, not specific to API management as well. And now the presenter works. So if we adapt that to API management, this is basically what we get. We have that dual plane architecture consisting of the control plane where all of your management, all of your control happens. So usually we have a developer portal there because you want to have that access management, right? So what application, what consumers can access my APIs. This is part of the control plane. And we also have an administration portal where you do all of the configuration, the traffic shaping, the rate limiting, like, okay, I want my API to be available like with a free plan, with a paid plan that might be a bit more performant. And then we have the actual data plane. This is where the API gateway itself resides. And that means the requests are going from top to bottom. So the application sends the request, it goes through the data plane, through the gateway to the service implementations. So in case of Grace, as we just heard, this here would be that Postgres database, and here we have the layer 7 gateway. So this is the most basic architecture that you have. You just divide by control plane and data plane. Now, the fun starts when you add support for multiple environments. It might be that you have a hybrid architecture, that you have services that run on premise and that you have services that run in a cloud, or maybe you have multiple clouds. Another example of this is if you have a central IT and a business unit IT, and every business unit can do what it actually wants. So every business unit is separated from each other. So what you can do then, if we add multiple environments to the picture, is, well, of course, you can just put all of your environments under that API gateway. You just keep one data plane and one control plane. This architecture is called the single APIM solution instance. Now, the problem that you have here is that all of your requests are routed through that API gateway, which means that you might have a problem if you have some kind of latency here, right? So where's your API gateway? Your API gateway should ideally always be near your backend service, near your upstream service, right? So that the way from your gateway to the service is rather small, rather quick. Now, if you put all of your environments, the on-prem, the clouds, and so on, under the same gateway, this isn't true anymore, right? So for one environment, it might be very quick because the gateway is nearby. For a second environment, you might have to route through a VPN tunnel, and then you have some additional firewalls to get into the second cloud or whatever. So this is, from the topology point of view, not an ideal solution. And something that's also missing is you don't have any traffic isolation. So for example, these environments could also be internal and external. That means all your internal and external traffic is routed through the same systems, through the same gateway, and you don't have any traffic isolation at all. So to overcome these shortcomings, what you could do is you could just multiply this architecture, and you could say, okay, I have one data plane and one control plane for every of my environments. That means you could put your API gateway as close to the upstream service as possible. You can have a traffic isolation because they are totally separate environments. However, now you created a new problem. Now you created the problem that you have 3 developer portals, that you have 3 admin portals that you need to manage. While you could argue that the admin portals, okay, that's fine. You know, I know my guys, they are capable, they can take care of it. For example, they do have open 5 or 6 layer 7 policy managers all the day anyway, right? But for your third-party consumers, for your partners, right? This is a very hard situation because now they need to know which developer portal they need to access in order to get access to that API, to this APIs, to this APIs, to this APIs. And that is something that your consumers, your partners, that shouldn't be necessary. They should have one central point that they can access, and they know, okay, here are all the APIs of Messe München. Here are all the APIs of William Hill. No matter, right? Speaking for William Hill, as we will hear in a few minutes, if it's sports or if it's gambling, they don't care. They want to access William Hill APIs. So how to solve that? And to solve that, you can think of this architecture, and this is an architecture that is called distributed API management. And it basically means that you still have your 3 separate data planes. So you still have your best possible network topology, you still have traffic isolation, but you only have one control plane, and that control plane manages all of your environments. So if you will, that control plane is a centralized management component, and your data planes are distributed processing. And that is where the name comes from, that distributed API management. And the nice thing here is, for distributed API management, the gateways are all the same. So for example, all of this is layer 7. So the control plane must just be compatible with layer 7. It must only speak layer 7. So to give you the example here, We have 3 separate data planes, 1 for the on-prem, 2 for some cloud services. This could be also some more niche environment, which we'll come to shortly. All of them run layer 7 gateways, and the layer 7 developer portal is multi-tenancy capable, which means you can just have 1 tenant for every of your environment, or you can put them all into the same tenant as you would like to do. So you just have that 1 developer portal. And what's then still missing is that 1 admin portal, where that 1 place where you can see all of your gateways, that aggregates all of the metrics so you can have analytics, that takes care of moving APIs between these different data planes. And that is the API Gateway Manager. Yeah, I mean, 5 minutes? Yeah, okay. So this is the API Gateway Manager that enables all these processes, that enables API ops across all these different environments, right? And this is set up, for example, I think that's quite similar on a very high architecture level to what William Hill is doing. But stay tuned for that talk, because that's really cool what they are going to show. Now, if not all of these gateways are layer 7, we have a new problem, because now our control plane that is only capable of speaking layer 7 is of no use anymore. And the question is, how likely is that to happen? And from our experience, Detlef talked about the many projects we did with customers, this is something that we see more and more in the marketplace. There are customers that tend to use different solutions for internal and external services. Or, as I said, you have that like niches where you have specialized gateways. Like, for example, if you're in the IoT market, right, and you're running MQTT APIs, then you probably have an API platform especially and only specifically for those IoT APIs, and you don't want to stream them a second time through a second gateway. Another possibility where we see this with customers is like, they have all their APIs running on layer 7, but then there's that 1 team that wants to use some serverless solution, and they run some AWS Lambdas or Azure Functions or whatever. And their natural choice is to go with the native gateway of that cloud. So they now have to decide what to do. And again, you could split it up. You can multiply the API management solutions, but you have the same problems. You still, or you again have 3 developer portals. You have 3 administration portals, 3 different configurations. And the idea is the same as with the distributed API management. You use 1 control plane that controls, that manages all of your data planes. But now this control plane must speak all of those different languages. And the more systems you use, the more systems you want to configure, the more capable needs your control plane to be. And this setup is called federated API management. And again, if you think about how can this be, or how can this look like when you are deploying layer 7, then layer 7, the gateway will be in one of your data planes, probably the one with the most APIs, as you have been using it for quite some years and are adding more to it. But the control plane, you cannot use the layer 7 developer portal anymore because it's just compatible with the layer 7 gateway. So you have to replace that as well. And exactly that, and control plane that speaks a lot of different platforms is what we are bringing to the marketplace in this year, and it's called the API control plane. Rather simple, just put on the front what's in. And this is the basic idea. Now, why is this important, and why is it important to know if you talk about distributed API management, so an all layer 7 setup, or federated API management, a mixed setup? It's just because that decides what kind of solution you have to deploy and what kind of tooling you want to use in the future. So this is important to know the route you are going, what you want to be capable in the future. And these terms, especially the federated API management, they will be much more visible in the future, because that is what Gartner will be using in their API Management Magic Quadrant that is about to be released next month. So they settled on this term, and they will benchmark all the API management solutions for their capability for distributed and federated. So if you read the Magic Quadrant, or if you read any of the publications by Gartner, you need to know these terms, and that was why I would like, or wanted to introduce them to you. So that's from me. And Armin, do we have some questions online or in the room, I think?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marcus, for the introduction to a new notion called the federated API management. Let me see, are there any questions in the room to begin with? Looks like a no. Online? All right. In which case, again, Marcus, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now it's a real pleasure to welcome Aaron White from Broadcom, who's the global head of product management for Layer 7, who came all the way from Canada. Aaron, thank you so much for being with us today. It's a real pleasure. And Aaron will be talking about the Layer 7 roadmap and a general update. So Aaron, over to you.
I have
Thank
been
you.
to Canada recently, but I don't live there.
All right.
Just to be clear.
Yes. Is there a question? Yeah.
Yes, fine.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
We can. We can.
Okay, I was trying to put in the chat the question, but it was disabled. Anyway, my question is very simple. Maybe I missed the if it's been already clarified. The question is, what are the main features that can be done via the API Manager? I mean, you can manage policies, analyze traffic, troubleshooting. So this is the question.
Yep. So,
Thank you.
am I on? Yeah, okay. So yeah, the main features of the Gateway Manager when it comes to the distributed API management model, of course, is we have all of your Layer 7 infrastructure within the application, which means you can watch them all at one go. So you have all the metrics in one place, you have alarming, you have like these health metrics, like do I have service degradation on my services? Are they getting slower and slower and slower? So that's one part of the product. Second part is everything that is around migrations and API ops. So the tooling that you get with like the Broadcom out of the box is basically the Gateway Migration Utility and now the Gradle plugin, which are both command line tools. So if you would like to have a visual way of doing a migration, then you can use the API Gateway Manager, because it basically tells you what changes have been made to what services, what is different. You get a change notification, you get a prediction on what will happen on your target gateways. And of course, everything is automatable, including the connection to the Git repository. So you can, we support with a very few or very small effort on your side to really get started with API ops and all of the DevOps processes. Maybe we'll have some more info on that later in the roundtable. And beside all of that API ops and policy as code, as it is called as well, what we also do is, because we know all of the infrastructure and we know how all of the infrastructure is configured, we can also do some best practice analysis using our advisor tool, which basically checks, are your environments healthy? Are they configured correctly? Do you have some security issues that perhaps by misconfiguration that you're not aware of, that certain ports are opened, that certificates are expiring or have been expired, that private keys are expiring? So that is basically the whole span that the Gateway Manager covers. And of course, we always have the opportunity to start a trial on our website, or also on our website, we have the opportunity to schedule a call with us to get into more depth with the Gateway Manager. Right? Because I don't want to take away all of Aaron's time.
All right. Thank you, Marcus. Any more questions online? All right. Thank you again. And Aaron, excuse me, over to you.
Thanks a lot. I'm on, okay, brilliant. Yeah, so I'm going to give a roadmap and update. I would say I'm not offended by any questions. I've been product manager for a while, but some of those decisions are out the product of mine, some of my predecessors, but I'd rather get feedback. So if there are any questions, please let me know. If there are lots, I might have to really speed up my presentation. So is this working? Did we work that? Okay, so it's a disclaimer. Things I say might change because stuff happens, okay? Just wanted to quickly touch on, I guess, the elephant in the room from a Broadcom perspective. We are part of what we call IMS, Identity and Access Management, from Symantec. That's our division name. But there are some big changes happening at Broadcom. You may well be aware, right? We're spending quite a large amount of money on VM. The plan right now, as far as we know, is that nothing will happen to this division at all. We'll keep focusing on what we're doing. There are some obvious synergies with things like Tanzu and that kind of thing that VM brings in, but we are not looking at making any changes. So I just wanted to make that clear. We are continuing to develop the product and go forward. Someone thinks I'm not moving quick enough already. I also wanted to talk about our solution priorities. Again, nothing has really changed from a layer 7 perspective. We want to be and continue to be one of the API management leaders in the industry, and we are going to focus on the things that people have touched on already: security and performance. If you read the analysts, and some of them like us and some of them don't like us, and when I say us, I don't really mean layer 7, I mean Broadcom, we get top results on the performance and the security of the product. That's where we're going to continue to focus. This is really important to me, customer engagement. When I took over the PM role a couple of years back, I was kind of shocked and worried that we had things in our backlog and features being developed that customers weren't waiting for. Now I know that we can come up with some good ideas, but we should be validating them. So we have a number of ways we ask customers to get involved. We have a customer advisory board once every PI. We actually didn't do that this PI because it was slap bang in the middle of summer and no one was going to turn up. So we will do another CAB in the upcoming PI, which we're just starting today pretty much. We have an early adopter program. I'll kind of put a shout out for this. We are going to launch version 11 of our gateway, and you'll see some of the big things that are affected by that. The early adopter program is for customers that want to work with us, with our engineering team, on getting upgraded. So we both get the feedback. We get early feedback from customers on what that upgrade was like. Are there any gotchas? Did we document things very well or not very well? That kind of stuff. So that will be one we're definitely pushing out there as we get nearer to the version 11 release date, which is at the moment planned for early December. The community is becoming more and more important, and I'll talk about experimental features and our progressive delivery model and how we're putting that onto the communities, but it's a great place to find out about things we're doing, including every PI. We put an update of what we're actually working on this, and our PIs are pretty much quarterly, so you can find those things out. We have a monthly office hours call, which I know some of you on this call and in this room have attended. We are happy for anyone to attend, listen to the topics, ask any question they want afterwards. Doesn't have to be related. And we'd also like some suggestions for topics. We pick these topics every month, but we'd love our customers to choose those things. Down the bottom, this is just an FYI. If you are, newer to the layer 7 solution, or you've not caught up on what was in the last release, we have a number of free training resources. So for instance, CR2, which came out, version of the gateway came out just recently. The new features will all have how-to videos, and they'll be on the IMS Academy within a couple of weeks. So a good set of resources, and the API Academy less product specific. So that's really important to me. That's why I said I want, questions or ideas. Somebody said I'd have bought a list if I knew. I can't remember who that was earlier. Good. That's actually what I want, right? That's and if you can't get that list to me, the community does actually have an ideas page where we are starting to push customers more. There's a voting button, and we're going to take that feedback as how we prioritize what we do going forward. This has stopped working. Can someone forward the slide for me, please? Thank you. So one of the things when I get asked to do roadmaps is it's really difficult to know where your snapshot in time was. Did you know what came out in the last release? That kind of thing. So I don't want to dwell too much on these, but this is what just came out. So Gateway 10.1 CR2. You can see above there what's coming, and you can see what's going, importantly, right? So you can work out whether you need to upgrade or move away from older versions. Hopefully you're not on, you know, Gateway 9.2 or 8.4 or anything crazy like that. Yeah, I had a customer recently ask me about 6. You have a question? Okay, so the next couple of slides, if we go to the first one, kind of just give you a snapshot of what the current version has got in it, given the releases. So most of the stuff on the left has been around there from 10.1 or CR1. Most of the stuff on the right is related to what we just released. And there's some really cool things in there that if you've not seen, you should have a look. So for instance, HTTP routing assertions and the JWT encode and decode can now use a certificate via a variable. That can take a 100-line policy and reduce it massively into a much smaller policy. There are some interesting things if you're using Hazelcast. Unfortunately, the way Hazelcast do their upgrades mean there's a chance there's a breaking change there. Nothing we could do about that, but some interesting things there. And you'll see, and it's going to be the theme over the next slide, there's an experimental feature around GraphQL. So if you do have customers that are ready to use GraphQL, and that's a debate, you can actually start to use the GraphQL feature and protect specifically GraphQL APIs. This is what's come out in Portal. We've been doing a lot of work on account plans and rate limits and things like that. And I think we've done some good things on the Helm charts and the support for the platforms that we work with and the databases that we support. So this is Portal. These are kind of a reference really in a presentation of, I had 20 minutes, but we were late starting, so I don't know what I've got. Next slide is the same for MAG and the OTK. We've done a lot of work in the current version of OTK around FAPI and open banking standards. And actually we're releasing OTK 4.6 pretty soon, which is going to kind of wrap up a large amount of that work for people using the OTK in open banking. So yeah, last 3 slides are kind of reference, but I think it's important to put them in there because people do miss the odd version and miss the release notes. So this is something I wanted to talk about, and it's very much tied to our roadmap. We have been looking at what we do and how we get value to our customers, and we want to accelerate that a lot. So we are now looking at using a progressive delivery methodology, if you like. So we've very much in the past been here or here. Either you don't have a feature or you have a general availability. And that's just wrong, in my opinion. We need to get things out there. We need to get early validation, whether things work or don't work. So you'll now start to see things like experimental limited availability and preview. And actually, if you go to our documentation, it tells you what to expect for those features, what level of support, how to get there. Experimental, for instance, is not, you're not going to be able to raise a support ticket on that. We're going to manage that access and feedback through the community site, but means we can get it out there quicker. So, excuse me, at the end of each PI, we have what we call an accelerator week. And that accelerator week finished last week, and we challenged the engineering team to see how many things we could get out there as experimental or preview features. These are the things they tackled, and I'll show in a bit which ones are going to be features, experimental features. But there's a heck of a lot the team did in this week. Again, we're open for ideas of what you want done in Accelerator Week. There's some interesting things in here like reading OS variables, environmental variables into policy, There's some things around XSLT3 support. The things that I would say aren't code changes and updates, like Postman collections. If you're a PAPI user, or maybe a RESTman user, we're trying to put more and more Postman collections out there, so it's easier for you to use things. And there's some things like at the bottom there, certification of the OTK database with AWS Aurora DB. That's more of a mouthful than it looks on the slide. So we're trying to get a lot of these things out there. This was all done in a week. Apparently we were low lighting. And yeah, thankfully we have the problem now of how do we get 3 or 4 of these into preview features. So if you can just forward to the next slide. Right now, we have experimental or preview features on GraphQL, WebSockets, our Debian appliance, and gRPC. So they're actually out there now. Coming very soon, because of that Accelerator Week, we have XSLT3 support in that assertion. That schema validation should be V6 and V7. I think I did that when I was very tired. So schema validation version 6 and 7, environmental variables, being able to pull environmental variables from the OS into policy. Those 3 things should be available in a special image within the next couple of weeks. So yeah, we want feedback on those. One of the big things we're doing at the moment alongside that is GraphMan. If you've not heard of what we're doing with GraphMan, I would suggest you go back and look at some of our office hours replay calls. GraphMan is how we are taking RESTman forward. So, RESTman is very powerful, it's very useful, but it's probably a little bit harder to use than we would like, and it's probably a little bit slow than we would like in some scenarios. So GraphMan has been written from the ground up and has been very much focused on migration use cases to start with, and that's progressing very well. We hope to have, there is a very early version of that we can share with people, but we're hoping to have it kind of in the product or installable on the product around the same time we release version 11 for most of the migration use cases that you might want to look at. I think that's pretty cool. And then some things around Portal. So we're looking at decoupling the OTK from Portal, so you can use a gateway that doesn't have OTK installed. There's some extra stuff on rate limits and quotas that we're doing there. So these things are only going to work if we get feedback. And I'd love to get to the stage where I say too much feedback. But that's the plan that we're going with at the moment, and we will be doing Accelerator Weeks each PI, but we'll also be picking things during the regular PI that we want to put out there as experimental features. So next slide, please. This is the story around RESTman. I left these in depending on how much time we had, but I suggest if you really want to find more about GraphMan, the office hours replay call is the best way to do it. You'll see demos. If you go to the next page, this you might not see on the office hours demo, but this is what we're planning on shipping with GraphMan. So GraphQL is an interesting one. Some people shy away from it like it's something they're never going to understand and it's really complicated. It's just a load of HTTP calls, but they're all, they're pretty much all post, right? It's a bit like going back to SOAP where everything was a post. So what we're providing is a whole host of out-of-the-box calls, and in some ways not, combinations of calls, like being able to compare gateways and that sort of thing, so that people can get up and running. And hopefully once they do, they'll see the value in GraphQL approach and be able to exploit a lot of those things. So that's the GraphMan. If we go forward, maybe, next slide, please. This is what we've just done. So we're on PI 30, which finished just a few weeks ago. The teams kind of have a break from the regular work and do Accelerator Week. And that was really energetic this time. Accelerator Week started as an internal thing where the engineering team sort of worked on testing tools and bottlenecks in the engineering team. And it's developed much more. So this is what we've just delivered. So we released Gateway 10 CR2. We are continuing to work on our common criteria certification, which is very important for some of our federal and government customers. We have got that GraphQL assertion preview. We worked on Daffodil. The one that's in a slightly lighter text, we're working on a Kafka consumer capability. So we have the producer side and had that for a while. We were working on a tech preview. Unfortunately, we didn't finish it, but the good news is we're going to finish it in this PI, but it won't be a tech preview. It will be a full GA feature. So we did enough work to work out what we needed to do. We just didn't quite get the time to finish it for a couple of reasons. So yeah, again, these get posted on the community so you can see them at any point. If we go to the next slide, I can talk about what we are planning to do. And I've put the Debian symbol up because it's a really big thing for us. So unfortunately, CentOS, Red Hat decided to pull the rug from underneath us. And as a security solution, we cannot continue to develop a gateway on CentOS Stream. We can't control it enough. It's not stable enough. We won't get security certification on it. So we had, an internal evaluation. We looked at what we've got. We actually used Debian for a number of other appliances, including our privileged access management solution. So we are moving the gateway appliance to Debian. One of the big benefits of that for me is that Debian properly supports in-place upgrades. So with CentOS, when we went CentOS 6 to 7, Red Hat 6 to 7, all of them actually required a migration. So unfortunately, there is no CentOS to Debian upgrade, unless anyone finds that, and I would be very happy. But once we move to Gateway 11, in-place upgrades should be a very standard thing for us. So even when we move to Debian 12, it's a nice, neat story, right? Gateway 11 is going to be on Debian 11. But when we go to Debian 12, we will actually be able to do an in-place upgrade and remove any of those crazy migrations that we've forced you to go through, right? And we understand that. We're also updating the JDBC drivers. So we currently use Progress Data Direct drivers. That's becoming a little bit prohibitive from a technology and a contracts perspective. So we're actually going to move to using native drivers for the databases. And that will eventually enable us to do things more to exploit the database that we connect into. So we're using the Oracle driver for Oracle, that kind of thing. We are coming to the end of our current common criteria certification. That's a really long one that's been on the last few PIs, but we're getting very close to that. We're upgrading some libraries in FIPS and SFTP and the JMS over MQ drivers as well, continuing some of the work on Hazelcast. We have done and are continuing to work on Ephemeral Gateway solution. Yep. It's part of that journey, yep. See, part of the journey on Ephemeral Gateway is actually we do it, but it needs documenting better. It needs to be clearer guidelines. Yeah, so actually right now, we're just adding those documentation things, but we are starting to look at how the container gateway can run ephemerally and run with the portal. So yeah, that's part of it. Kafka consumer, as I said, we'll finish that Kafka story off for us so you can actually consume from a Kafka end and do that. Yep.
Yeah, I got lots of questions regarding Kafka and Kafka streaming. So what are we doing in the moment in totally asynchronous APIs?
Sorry, say that again.
Asynchronous APIs, where we have Kafka streaming, for example. What are we doing for this? Because you said Kafka consumer now. Is there anything we do specialized in layer 7?
So currently we can push out to a Kafka environment and actually get a response from it, but we can't sit and listen to a Kafka topic or stream and then kick off a process. So that's what we're adding to it in this PI. Okay. So once we have that, the capability will be equivalent to what we do with JMS and MQ and those kinds of things. Yeah.
Perfect.
OAuth Toolkit, again, like I said, working on the FAPI stuff. 4.6 will be released, which will wrap up quite a few features that we've kind of been putting out there recently. I think the OAuth Toolkit in the last 12 months has had more features and new capabilities than it's had for a little while. So that's exciting to see 4.6 come out. MAG, Mobile API Gateway. There's the constant journey with that of Android and Apple releasing new OS every year. Whether they need to or not, I don't know if that's, we had that conversation. Yeah, we actually had that conversation just yesterday about, do Apple really need a phone now every year? They probably don't, but of course they want to sell a new one every year. And from a portal perspective, there's a few things in there. So working on the dispatcher, we're working on decoupling OTK from portal. That will help us with the ephemeral gateway story for sure, but there's still some other things we need to do in that. How do you then sync and persist stuff when you haven't got storage on those gateways, rate limits and quotas, and we're also looking at normalizing our appliance. So for customers that don't use Helm charts, we'll continue to keep working on the Helm charts, making them more complete, and the man that's responsible for a lot of those is in the room. But for customers that aren't ready for that, and I think that's still a large majority of people aren't totally comfortable with Kubernetes yet, and I think we're going to hear more about that over the next couple of talks. We still provide an appliance. That appliance has been a CentOS-based appliance. Again, obviously we have to get off that, but it was also a slightly different flavor of the appliance we had on the gateway. So we're going to normalize onto one.
One question about the Debian. It's not like the appliance, about software gateway. We have a customer, I think might even be online here, that is for security reasons they were looking at possibly using the software gateway so that they could manage their own security and manage their own users and everything on those gateways rather than using an appliance and breaking the rules of the appliance. Is the software gateway still going ahead? Is that still
Absolutely.
something? It's not something that's going away.
No. It's not going away at all. So the only debate we have on that at the moment is when we release version 11 of the gateway, we're not going to have a software version that runs on Debian. So we're moving to Debian, and we see that as the right solution for our appliance. But no customer has actually asked us for a Debian software install yet. So we will continue to support CentOS and Red Hat that we still do until CentOS goes. We'll see about testing on stream, but that's to be decided, but the software version is not going anywhere.
Thank you.
Okay, and I have one slide left, I think maybe two actually, but the next slide is work, other things under consideration. So, whole host of things that we have either started and want to finish or haven't started yet at all. So, more integration with Kubernetes, more maybe gateway health and management within the portal or the infrastructure manager, however that pans out. Things like SNI support that have been around for a little while. The main thing we'll concentrate on the gateway specifically is the cloud native story. So once the Debian appliance is out, we're going to really pivot into looking at what we can do for the container gateway to help people that are moving in that journey. And that to be honest, that is some technical stuff and it's some enablement stuff, because we can do things as actually William Hill have proved it can run and be successful on containers, but we just want to make that easier and easier. And the final slide is just a call to for input, basically. Go to the community site, join the office hours, give us your feedback. We have a pretty experienced PM team now and a guy called George Maheris who is managing the communities for us and the outreach program. So if you want to be on an early adopter program or you want access to an experimental feature, you can go on the communities and kick those things off and get the feedback to us that we really want so that we can make sure those features are what you want to build. And if you can't get onto the communities or you have an issue, just email me directly. I'm never going to turn you down. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Aaron. There are there are two more questions from the audience online. The first one is, when do you expect Debian to be ready for production use?
So version 11 will be GA hopefully in December this year.
December this year. All right. Thank you. And the second one is, if there's a move from Red Hat or CentOS to Debian for appliance, what about container packaging? What base image would it be used? Would be used?
Great question. So currently we use CentOS, and we are evaluating what we want to do. So when version 11 is released, the container gateway will still be on CentOS. The reason we want to get the virtual appliance out is because I don't want to force people to migrate or do that upgrade in a short time period. People that are in a container world, their upgrade story, moving to a new version of a container is a much easier journey for them. So we're trying to give the appliance customers the biggest window we can before we have to get off CentOS. Then one of the spikes we're looking at this PI outside of the work we're delivering is, what do we do? Do we go to Debian Lite, which is one option, or do we go a little bit more work for us, but do we go to a distroless container? So that is still to be decided.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions. 3 questions. So one more. Apologize, didn't get that. Hang on 1 second. I'm rushing to the back. So third question is 3 more. All right. So first one, can we expect improvement in the policy manager in terms of the graphical user interface?
Can expect improvements. One of the things we're trying to do is focus on being able to do as much as possible without actually having to use Policy Manager. So we're trying to take the management capabilities and how you manage policy and that kind of thing out of Policy Manager. So it just becomes a build tool. Longer term, I think we'd like to do configuration and policy building without Policy Manager. So yeah, things that we're looking at, things that your gateway manager does. I think that's really more the future than necessarily rebuilding a policy manager or changing it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Second question is, will the AMI, the Amazon Machine image for Gateway 11 also be ready in December?
Unfortunately, there won't be an AMI version of version 11 on the gateway. So we did put a deprecation notice out in 10.1 that would be the last version where we provide an AMI. The reason being, the majority of our customers using the AMI, or in fact the Azure image, are looking to actually move to containers in those platforms rather than run a packaged image.
All righty, thank you. And the last question online that we have is, does the 11 have a container version with Debian?
We kind of answered that already. So it won't be. To start with, it will be still the CentOS base, but that's something we'll be assessing very early next year.
Okay, excellent. So again, thank you everyone for the questions. And most importantly, thank you, Aaron, for again being here.
Thank you.
And for answering those questions. So with that, let's have about a half an hour coffee break. We'll continue the session at about 20 past the hour. And for those who are in the room, please enjoy coffee and snacks. And we're here to answer any questions in the break. Again, for those who are online, you may continue asking questions, and everyone here in the room will be available for answering those questions in the chat, right? Thank you so much. And as I said, we'll reconvene at 20 past the hour. Thank you. So the two of you can just share that. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
There you go. All right, so now it's getting dark. That was probably a bit too much.
Always keep the CEO away from the panel.
Okay, let's continue with our session. And the next session up is a roundtable, a technical roundtable on the notion of API ops. So on stage, we have Peter Mersch, our head of sales and business development, who will be moderating that session. And he is joined by Aaron White from Broadcom, by Markus Müller, our CTO, and by Cesare Gacinski from William Hill, who will be joining us online, right? So Peter, let me give you my microphone and over to you.
Thank you very much, Armin. Yeah, as you heard, the roundtable will be regarding API ops. And now we have to switch over to get Cesare here on the screen, right? So we can see him as well, as we will be joined online from him, and we're sitting here in the meeting directly. So until this has been done, I guess we're going to start. The question would be, what is API ops? But before we're going over there, what we learned is the market that more and more APIs need to be built. The market is growing by 30 to 40% year over year. That means, here is, hey, Cesare, how are you doing? Perfect, thank you.
Hello. I was very comfortable, muted out, and now I will have to answer questions. So.
You are, perfectly. He's joining from Gibraltar, by the way, so very cool to have you in here. So
Thank you.
What we learned, like I said, the market is growing, so we get more and more APIs we have to manage by 30 to 40% every year. The point is with the same number of people, because everybody expects to get it easier and faster in place. And the business is demanding more and more services in a faster time to keep up with their business and to become competitive. So this is why we need automation in all we're doing, to get as much automation in place as possible. And API ops seems to be some of the processes, some of the methodologies to help us to achieve this. My first question would be to the audience, and please raise your hand who would like to answer the question is, what is API ops? Because this is complete new here in the market. Anybody?
Yeah, I think I can answer that because as you might have known, we as a Peter have been doing a webinar series on API ops, so we should know about what it is, and everyone who has attended some demos of mine knows that I stress this quite often. Well, basically API ops is just about processes, methods, tooling that allows us to get better business outcomes faster. And it basically draws off the methods of DevOps and GitOps, combines them in a way that are meaningful to APIs and to really achieve the business outcomes. It's not just a technical exercise, it's about business outcomes.
Mm-hmm. But if you're looking from the technical side, what is needed to get this done? And I know, Aaron, that you're coming from the DevOps perspective, right?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, for me, AI ops is, you mentioned another couple of ops, right? And Broadcom has a whole division which has called all its products ops afterwards. But yeah, I think it's a lot of what we were doing, but with a specific view on API management and APIs. I think we've seen, I've been with Layer 7 10, 11 years. And I've definitely seen that explosion that you were talking about, and the automation and management of those things is just becoming more and more important. So I think, yeah, some of the things that people are doing in the DevOps space are very relevant, but I think there's things we have to do a little bit differently as well.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And Cesare, anything about API ops? What is your opinion about that one?
That's actually quite interesting. I would say quite convoluted topic because that touches on several things. But I would start maybe to address what Markus said first. so from our perspective, from the perspective of well, let's see, architecture and development, this has API ops has several consequences, and first of them is I would touch on, maybe we should discuss this later on, something that I call myself atomicity. So the size of the object that is touched when the change is needed. So this will be number one. The second one is the blast radius of the releases and what we actually understand by CD and CR pipelines in the context of API ops. So CD in this context, of course, continuous deployment, and CR is continuous release. So deployment is from the API ops is sort of a safe step, which does not really touch running environment, and CR is a release that normally has to get some approvals, and then the change is actually being put live. And the last thing, but is also not the least one of all, is what I also call operational amnesia. So what I mean by this is that people come and go, and those people they learn things and they take those things away with them. And we would like to avoid that knowledge to be taken away, and would like it to stay with the company. And that's where the API ops also can help, when the procedures of deploying using the standardized APIs are in place. So that's my take on it.
Okay, yeah, very good. Thank you very much. And you all have already said that API ops is not one thing. It's more of the different things coming together, right? So from the technical perspective, Markus, what you said, there's GitOps coming in place, and you have the dev part, what is coming in place. From the technology point, what is really needed to get this implemented if I'm using Layer 7 or other API vendors?
Yeah, so first of all, we're dealing with code, right? So the whole DevOps motion comes from the software development side. And software is expressed as code, which basically means that all these tools were built for code. So the first thing that you need to do to get API ops running is that you need to be capable of expressing everything as code. And nowadays, even configuration files are counted as code. So you might have your JSON, your YAML, your whatever. And you express your infrastructure as code, you express your policies as code. So that's the first step, and then you can take it from there, because that means that you can use all the tools that have been written with software in mind, with code in mind, and you can just apply them to the API lifecycle. So that would be the first step from my experience that you have to get going, because if you start with tooling first without having that first step, you probably will have a hard time. So that's my take on it, but perhaps one of the other guys has another take on it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're looking at and striving towards is to make that configuration more code friendly, right? So, we came from a historical background of an XML gateway and SOAP. So everything was XML and in bundles that don't really marry with the modern idea of what that code should be and how I can move it around easily. So that's one of the reasons we're working tirelessly on changing the product and putting a new interface in, that those tools that you talked about will have the right config and the right type of code, or the easier type of code for people to use, because you could use XML, you could use a binary format, but you wouldn't want to, right? So yeah, that's one of the things we're definitely looking at, because I think the DevOps, AIOps space was coming along, and then the idea of continuous deployment and continuous release this kind of just gets accelerated when we move into the cloud deployments and the container deployments and Kubernetes. So yeah, we've been kind of getting along, and I think the energy of where we are is getting to a critical mass where it's becoming more normal. I wouldn't say it's totally normal yet, but it's getting there. So we need to provide those things.
Okay, thank you. You know what we know from the DevOps, from other applications, is that, like you said, seamless deployment into new features coming out. Will we see this for APIs as well? if we change some APIs with the new services on top of it, will we see the seamless deployment into the API environment? Anybody?
We can
That's
take it in
another-
turns.
Okay. So, okay, so shall I?
Please.
Yeah, okay. So from my perspective, I think and based on what has been already said, is the API ops as such, or as a part of DevOps, most probably, although I'm not really 100% sure. There's probably some common part, but some of the techniques might be different in the long run. But I think we should be quite clear about one distinction: is what the API gives us is not only the deployment part, but also the let's say the view part. It's like a viewport of what the configuration is currently. So of course that allows all the development tools to be moved, outside of the radius of the operational of the company itself, and developers can work very remotely if they really want to. They have access to the API in read mode, for instance. So this is the one of the topics. The second one is the post or put operations. It would be a part of any release, are actually where the interesting part is also concerned, which touches on what Markus said. It's using some kind of a repository and version control that allows this seamless integration of different environments with the release process. So of course, we would like to see that there is a code being pushed to the Git repository. This code is being evaluated, then is being put into the acceptance environment. Then somebody ticks the box and say, okay, this is ready for release, and we can push it to production. So this is really nice. But again, this introduces some of those things that I mentioned before, mostly about how fine-grained this deployment should be, and how fine-grained the storage of the changes should be. Plus, of course, the fact that people come and go again, and we need to have the process in place that is as much independent of the developers team as possible, in the sense of knowledge base, not in the sense of the number of people, but in the sense of knowledge base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. There's the technology aspect, but then there's a process aspect, and then flow aspect, because you need to have the right information go from one point to the next one, and this need to be checked, right? Otherwise, you put something in production you do not want to have, right?
I think, what I like to add here is that, we're talking about API management right now and building those proxies to the APIs themselves. But if we look at the APIs, then I think we will see a lot more changes in a lot faster pace, because I think everyone in the industry is going to an API as a product kind of mindset, which basically means that your API is not just reflecting the data structures that you like to expose, but your API is serving a purpose. Your API is having a business case on its own. It's having a use case on its own. And this evolves. So the source data might not change in any way. So for example, if we use the Grace example from Messe München, so the data is the data. You have the exhibitors, you have the visitors, but the API is tailored for a specific business case, and that business case involves. That means we see a lot of changes, small changes, fast-paced changes, and that means that we also have to make sure that we have the right infrastructure and the right processes in place in order for our published APIs, the services, API proxies, no matter how you name them, so that they keep up to date with the upstream API, and make sure that those effects and business cases that force the upstream API to change is also something that changes the API proxies and the managed service as well. So I think just because of the necessity to change the API that is exposed faster, you also need processes in place to be able to update that published proxy, that published service as well, as fast and as automated as possible. Because if not, the publishing part will be the bottleneck for the whole product. And that is something that you don't want to have with a middleware tool, basically, which the API management is. So I think we will see a lot more of these seamless, fast-paced changes. Yeah.
Right.
I actually would agree with Marcus on this one just quickly. And that's why I mentioned this atomicity and operational amnesia. Sorry, not atomicity and the blast radius. So in this case, atomicity would allow to have the capability of making as few changes as possible within the context of what was really necessary, and then the blast. This actually, allows to limit the blast radius of those changes. So if I have to download the whole JSON, which is API configuration, and I cannot change a very specific part of this configuration, that's probably not good.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think the more APIs we get and the more fast pace we get, the more risk there is, right? And I'm already starting to see customers who have gone, we had a monolith and we want to get to microservices. And they've broken everything up so much that there are so many dependencies, they can't actually move at the fast pace they want because they have too many changes. I think part of being able to get over that is API design at the front end of all this is really important. Because if you want to change an API fast pace, that's great. But if you screw up and break the connections of all your existing clients, you're in a bad place very quickly because people just stop using your API. The other thing I think might slow this up a little bit, we have customers that are at the forefront of this sort of thing and are fast paced, but we also have a lot of customers running APIs internally in a totally different way where security is way more important than being able to deploy 50 times a day or, being able to do those things. So I think for those customers, this is a far-fetched journey for them that they won't go to. I do think the visibility part of API ops or anything ops is going to become more and more important though. Like, where are my APIs? How many have I got? Because they could get out of control really quickly.
Right. Yeah, I guess we have seen this as well, even in one customer, where we have different departments, they're creating all the APIs. And in the beginning of API management, if there was a call, just build an API. And everybody was, just build another API. There was no control. And now we would like to control it a bit more. We would have a catalog in there. So we have a description. We see what the API is doing, what business benefits you're getting out of this. And API ops can help with this, right? As Git is involved, etc. And the question would be then, how does it help us now with the API ops and Git? Is there really a control out of this?
Yeah, I think the good thing about, forcing, let's call it forcing everyone into that process and having a dedicated storage is basically everything that you deploy has to be in that storage, right? So it's not just, okay, like 20 people have an admin account to the policy manager and are able to create services, right? So if you prevent this by having an automated process where you say, okay, if you want to publish an API, this is the process. It needs to be in a repository. It needs to have an open API spec. That API spec as part of the pipeline is linted for errors, is linted for security violations, is linted for quality. And only if that is, greenlit, then it is published. That basically means that you get a better quality, you get a better handle on it, you get a better grip on quality, on security. And by just limiting it to the process, you have the lower probability to have like shadow APIs or zombie APIs, so that type of APIs that either you didn't know that were there in the first place, or that you wanted to shut down like 7 times, but nobody knows who is using it and what it does, so better not touch it, right? So yes, applying a rigorous process is good for control. And the fact that in API ops we try to automate everything I think is good for adoption, because if you force a process on people and it's just more work for them, they will reject it. But if you have a process where you say, okay, if you use this process, it's less work for you because everything is automated, then the adoption will be higher and people will not refuse to change their way of work.
I'm not totally sure I'm convinced by that. I think having a process for deploying and running those things, that process you described, yeah, it helps the people that built it to adopt it because you're in there, but it doesn't necessarily help other people adopt it, other parts of the business. So unless you have some sort of overarching thing, and I think we've seen this in history, right? So when we first had SOAP services, we had UDDI directories, which were to solve exactly this problem. It was, I can find a SOAP service that's already there, I can reuse it, I can see who's using it and governing it. And then we had REST, and it was like the Wild West. And some organizations will use API ops or whatever ops we want to call it and use that to control it. But there's a real danger with some companies that they'll just have a process for deploying an API, but everyone will use that process and you'll end up with exactly what you described, orphan APIs, duplicate APIs. And yeah, I think it's going to be really hard for some organizations to control that. Right. Because actually that process is making it easier.
Okay. Cesare, what's your take on this?
Actually, what comes to my mind in what has been said is two things: is the maybe the development context control. So who can actually change and what in the Git repository? So this will be the first stage of this control. And the second one is definitely needs to be in place is some kind of role-based access control that controls what is deployed and where. Otherwise, I would agree that API ops could lead to things spiraling out of control probably very, very fast.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So what we heard, we have the technical aspect, then we have the process aspect. And I guess, Markus, you said already you would start with the process before you go to the technical part. Was it true?
Yeah, it depends where you're at right now, right? So different teams are at different capability levels, and some teams are better with the processes part, some people are better, or some teams are better with the technical part. So I think it's hard to have one answer to this, like what to do first. There are some just technical requirements that you have to you know, to get done, right, in order to being able to do it. But the question how to introduce API ops to teams, I think, is one that you can only answer for each team individually, right? Because as is with all changes, so not sure if everyone is interested in behavioral theory, but it's basically, I think as a PM, you always have that TX in mind, which basically is, okay, you have to be like something has to be 10 times better or 10 times easier in order to change behavior, learned behavior, right? So if you're just a bit better, people won't change their behavior. So for most of the time, I think I would consult teams to start with where they can make the biggest improvements in the shortest amount of time, so the low-hanging fruits, because then the process of getting it done is easier because you have, you know, that feeling of success, right? So you've got something done, you see that your pain points have been relieved. And again, this is different from team to team. So I would have to look, or I think it would be wise to look at the team in its current state before applying something blindly out of a book, because someone in his situation, in his team, found that that is the best approach.
No, I think you have to do both together. You can't just go all out on business or technical. It has to be, I mean, if you haven't got the technical, maybe the business doesn't work and vice versa. So yeah, but I think if I had to say which is more important because of what I believe could get out of control, if you give a whole bunch of developers the technical tools and the technical aspects to do what they want, that's fine, but that doesn't control them. And I think that, for me, that worries me, that if you're not controlling how they do it and what they do, you'll just end up with, yeah, crazy amounts of APIs that you've no idea where they are and who's done them. But
Okay.
So I think the ops bit of this is really actually where people can get mega value. I think the continuous release and that kind of stuff, I don't know many businesses that releasing their APIs is a very slow or very laborious thing. They can, of course, get better. I think the operational part and the viewing part of what's happening and who's happening, the governance part, that's where people can really get benefit and not end up with duplicate APIs and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, governance and catalog and so on, very important. Cesare, you're on the way in the moment to design it in a new way. You moved over to Kubernetes and you would like to introduce API ops, for my understanding, or at least CI/CD pipelining. Where are you in the process in the moment?
So maybe just a few words of history. So we try to have this approach as a original idea, but for a few reasons, we had to use a tactical solution, which was actually presented on one of the slides in the previous presentations. But what we would like to achieve is we would like to achieve two things. First one, we would like to make sure that developers can actually push to the repository whatever work they need to push, and we would like to isolate them from the operational part in the sense of that they would not normally, under normal circumstances, be allowed to release anything, because that's normally it's dangerous. So what this means that we have two different contexts. So one context is a development context, which is using the Git repository, and then we have operational context, which is actually touching on GitLab runners. It touches on the role-based access control, what those GitLab runners can do, on access to different parts of the infrastructure and the API gateways, which is again a separate context of the runtime environment. So that's what we would like to achieve, and also we would like to have one central point of reference, and this point of reference is of course the GitLab, in our case GitLab repository, which allows to have a few things in place. But the most common one are the common place of reference, and also a look into the history of what has been done and by whom. And that's where we would like to be, in the relatively short time, because we have all the tools now in place, and we can proceed with our plans.
Okay, thank you. We now have 5 minutes to go. Markus, you introduced about federated and distributed. Does this affect somehow API ops if we like to implement this?
Yes and no. If we're talking about distributed API management, it's basically just a question of size, right? So because if you have only a small environment, a small setup, you can get away with almost any process, because it's the people. Even if you have a high fluctuation, they get used to the systems really fast. So they know what was published when, they know exactly where is what, and you can rely on your people. Now, if your infrastructure grows and grows and grows, and you have to scale faster and faster, then people, they have a cognitive limitation, right? So there is the point where they don't know it anymore, and that is where API ops can make a difference. When it comes to federation, so using multiple systems, I think there is a very, very big benefit, because if your federated API management really works and is really fully featured, then you can control, publish, govern all of your platforms with the same workflows, right? So you don't have to think about, is that API running here? Is it there? You just use the same workflow, and you let the tools do the job of translating it to the specific environment. So I think there's a big benefit in case of that federation. And one thing that might help one or the other to introduce API ops, if you have a platform team, if you have an API team, get it right inside of the team, right? So you don't have to open up to the whole company, to all of your backend developers right from the start. Just implement it in the team, get it right for all your infrastructure if you have federation, and then open up slowly to prevent that, chaos breaking out because everyone is trying what is capable. Because one thing for sure, everyone that has been with developers love to try things, and developers love to play with things. So if you give them a new toy, for sure they will try what they can do with it, right?
Okay, thank you. Aaron?
I thought you were going to add, and they like to break things, right? That's the third thing. I think actually from the presentation earlier,
Mr. München?
yeah, Mr. Munchen, I think there's an interesting thing from a gateway perspective here, because some of the things, if you're deploying a new API, there's a new version of it. If you're using the API gateway as a proxy, a security enforcement point or whatever, that can be part of that deployment, or it could be totally separate. There are certain use cases where you're using the gateways as an integration point, as an API creation, actually the API server pretty much in your use case. I think some of those will need to be handled differently as well, because you've got to automate and do the process in a slightly different way, but depending on what you're doing. So yeah, I'd not thought about that until we started this conversation, but that's just a little bit of a different way of looking at it. I think that will have to be managed.
Okay, cool. So last point would be then, is there any kind of business benefit when you're going to implement API ops? What do you think?
Because they are currently doing it.
Yep. Cesare, you're first.
Okay, so from our perspective, is two main points. So this is the very clear context isolation of what developers are doing and how our CI/CD CR pipeline is implemented. And I think this is the most important thing. And I could paraphrase what Markus said, that probably the last thing we should be using to find out what is running and why is the production environment. We should be actually making sure that we have the source of truth that is as far as for production as possible and as well protected as possible in the sense of what can be deployed, how this can be deployed, and who can actually perform the release and deployment procedure, or can have the proper access control to the deployment pipeline. So of course it doesn't mean that normally developers shouldn't have access to the deployment pipelines. Absolutely not. It's just about making sure that we are not breaking things in production, in the customer-facing environment. And that's where the API ops actually plays, in my opinion, plays a very important role.
Okay, thank you. One last sentence from Aaron.
Well, to that question you asked, does it bring any business value? If it does,
Exactly.
if it doesn't, then what the heck are we doing it for? I would say,
Exactly.
right? But I think there are a number of key ones. I think touched on a couple there, but yeah, I think speed to market, control, and the automated way. It just has to speed it up. If it's not speeding it up and it's not giving more value to the business, then we should all stop talking about it.
Okay. Markus?
Yeah, I'm totally with Aaron on this one. Of course, we have business benefits, right? So one additional might be that if you automate the things, the people that have done these processes before manually, they now have time on their hands. They now can, build the platform and can improve the platform. And as we all know, no matter if the developers or your partner developers are inside or outside of the company, a better developer experience for them equals in better services, equals in better applications, equals in better customer success. So just by improving the platform, making sure the platform guys have time on their hand to improve the experience for everyone using the APIs, you get a lot of benefits.
Okay, that's very cool.
If I could
Thank you
add
very much.
maybe one sentence better, just time to market as a business metric is of course very nice and important, but to maybe we should remember that this should be also measured against recovery time objective and recovery point objective in case something goes wrong. So of course we have speed one way, but we should be also careful about how long it takes us to to go back in case something is broken.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. There was one part you would like to say. Otherwise, we would do.
I was just going to say that message that you just described is really interesting. Layer 7's 20 years old. Actually last month, 20 years old, which is amazing. It's still, very successful performing product. I think it points brilliantly. The original message behind Layer 7 was we can offload the stuff that that isn't business logic to allow the developer to spend more time on the API or the service backend and deliver the business logic. That's exactly the same message we're now talking about with API Ops. I think that's really interesting, and it really made me smile inside. So I thought I'd share that. 20 years and it's still the same thing we're trying to do.
Very cool. And by the way, we're helping with this as well, with our solution from Apida, working closely together with the Layer 7 solution to implement API Ops and help to implement API Ops. So thank you very much to all of you. And they're closing the roundtable because we have to move on. And the next one is on stage in a second, I guess. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. We're good to proceed? Okay, thank you so much. I think that was a very lively roundtable discussion. I hope you enjoyed that. And as said, if you have any more questions, comments, or so, please feel free to use the online chat or Q&A capability of the Zoom client. Next up, we have Gary Vermeulen, platform architect from Broadcom, who will be talking about transitioning from on-premise or appliance-based gateway implementations to container-based implementations, which is a very nice lead into the session thereafter by William Hill, who has exactly gone through that journey, basically, right? So Gary, over to you, and please take us away. Thank you.
Thank you. So today, as Armin said, I'm going to be covering a question that comes up more and more often with a lot of our customers, which is, how do I transition from the appliance gateway to the container gateway? So there was a prediction from Gartner that around, I think it was 75% of global customers are going to be running containerized or wanting to run containerized applications by 2022. We're sort of midway into 2022 now, so we can assume that number is probably closer to 80–85% by now. So it only makes sense that the gateway comes into that, because it is something that's going to be securing those applications and those microservices within a Kubernetes environment. So quick disclaimer. So with this, I really wanted to do a demonstration, but trying to fit that into 20 minutes would have been a bit too difficult. So we'll start very simply with what the container gateway is. We'll then go into the different types of transition projects that you might be looking at doing. So we'll go through migration, expansion, or greenfield. We're going to take a look at a non-exhaustive list of the key differences between the appliance gateway and the container gateway. We'll then take a look at the gateway Helm chart. So I've already mentioned Kubernetes. Kubernetes is probably the leading container orchestration platform out there today. That's the one that we provide support for, and that's what we're looking at providing support for in the future. So Kubernetes is a big part of what we offer from a Kubernetes perspective with the gateway. We'll then take a look with that at the network topology. So there's going to be some differences between the appliance gateway and the container gateway. And that's going to lead to different ways of managing gateways, but we've tried to keep that as close to what you would have in the appliance to container as possible, so that you don't have too much change from a management perspective when you move across the two. We'll then take a look at port configuration. So some of the stuff that you get for free from a configuration standpoint in that gateway Helm chart. And then we're going to go through a very, very basic migration process. So this is going to be slide based, and it's going to cover one simple way of going through a migration process. Again, non-exhaustive, and won't cover everything. So migration, expansion, or greenfield. So it's very likely that a lot of time and resources have gone into getting your appliance gateways, your on-prem gateways, whether those are running in your own data centers or in a cloud environment, up and running. It's unlikely that the role of those is going to change overnight. So you're more likely to do something in parallel in one of these manners. So migration, where we're referring to migrating your entire Layer 7 API gateway estate, that would be migration. That's something that's best done in parallel with your existing environments. So you're not going to be doing a hard switch between one environment to the other. It's something that's going to take a period of planning, testing, and so on. So expansion, I think this potentially leads into the next presentation as well, but you want to expand into Kubernetes to take advantage of fast provisioning and stuff like auto scaling, which is something that Kubernetes gives us for free. So we allow you to configure that with our gateway Helm chart, as is said there. So the final is greenfield. So so you might have some new applications and microservices that you are running in Kubernetes, and you want to take advantage of some of the features that the gateway has. So you currently have that on-prem. You don't plan on changing that, but you might want to take advantage of that. So that may be a good case for running the container gateway in ephemeral mode. That takes the reliance, or that takes the requirement of the external MySQL database away. There are some limitations in that, but that is, as Aaron mentioned earlier, one of the modes that we're looking at supporting, having support for in the future. So the container gateway, very simply put, is a slimmed down containerized version of the Layer 7 API gateway. It currently runs on CentOS 7. As was mentioned earlier, it might be, so CentOS 7 is going to be end of life in 2024. So that'll either move to some kind of distroless base image, and it could also be Debian, and it's currently available on Docker Hub. So one of the key differences between the appliance gateway and the container gateway, when it comes to comparing the two, is the time it takes to provision, maintain, scale, patch, and upgrade. So the amount of time that it takes to provision a virtual appliance and boot a virtual appliance, deploy the gateway, and so on, is going to be much greater than that of the container. Stuff like applying patches, you're not going to be SSHing onto the container gateway to apply a patch. You're going to be pointing at a new image, and the same applies for upgrades. So the amount of time that it takes to administer and maintain a gateway is going to drastically reduce when you're comparing the two. That doesn't necessarily apply to gateway startup time. That's going to depend on the types of policies and the types of services that you're running. So as I mentioned, I'm not going to be covering an exhaustive list of the architectural and operational differences between the appliance gateway and the container gateway. I have linked where appropriate to the full lists of the architectural and operational differences. I've also got links in the bottom right here to some of the new documentation that we're putting together around the container gateway. That's thinking in Kubernetes, and also some of the office hours that we've already done on some of the topics mentioned here. So one of the first questions that we get asked when we have this conversation with customers is there an included MySQL in the container gateway? The answer is no. You're going to have to take advantage of, you're going to have to make use of an external MySQL. If you're running in AWS, Azure, or GCP, then taking advantage of the relational database services that they provide is going to be a best option. The managed MySQL solutions that they provide will give you stuff like daily backups, points-in-time recovery where applicable, and the ability to clone databases is relatively easy as well. So as I mentioned with the Greenfield projects, there's also the potential, if you have a more simple use case, of running the gateway in ephemeral mode where everything is configuration based. There's also a single network interface. This is important from a network topology standpoint. So this is something I'll cover a bit more in the network topology slide. But basically in the appliance gateway, you have the ability of defining multiple network interfaces that may be part of different subnets on the gateway appliance. You don't have the same capability, so you don't have the same network segregation and so on that you would have from that perspective. It's a little bit different on the container gateway. There are ways to work around that, and I'll sort of show how we can get some of that functionality back. We've also got limited access to the underlying host. That's important for a couple of reasons. First is access to the CPU. Because we have the additional abstraction layer between the container gateway and the underlying host, we don't have full access to the CPU. That is going to have a performance impact on high computational tasks within the gateway. So we have added some updates to Gateway 10 and 10.1 that do improve that performance. But there is going to be a difference. So load testing and stuff like that is definitely something that should be done prior to going into your production environments. The other reason is access to the file system. So the container gateway has an ephemeral file system. So if you have stuff like custom assertions or Java libraries that you want to load onto your container gateways, you're going to have to create a custom gateway image, and you can have to create a custom gateway image and use that when deploying stuff like the gateway Helm chart. For stuff like policies, configuration, and so on, you can use RESTmin bundles. You can bootstrap those directly onto the container gateway at runtime or at deploy time, and you can have those running on the container gateway. So a couple of the operational differences. So from an administration perspective, that's not going to change too much between the appliance gateway and the container gateway. You still have access to Policy Manager. If you're using RESTman, in the future GraphMan, and/or external tools, so your own scripts or other products to manage gateways, you'll be able to continue doing that. From a logging perspective, that's fairly different. So in the appliance gateway, you can name multiple log files. You also have access to stuff like traffic logger and so on. In the container gateway, everything goes to standard out and standard error. So instead of installing an agent onto your appliance gateway, that's going to happen. Logging is going to happen more at a cluster-wide basis. So you'll have something like Fluentd running in your Kubernetes cluster. That's going to be taking metrics, taking logs from the gateway, as well as everything else running in your Kubernetes cluster and sending it to a log aggregator. So it's very much a cluster-wide approach versus a single gateway node or a single gateway virtual appliance. But there are some limitations with that. For metrics, there is a link to an office hours that we did for logging audits and metrics on the container gateway. So for more detail on that, I suggest you take a look at that. Metrics, we don't have access to traffic logger, but we do have the background metrics processing task, which gives you dashboard-like metrics, and you can send those to an external source. And we have some examples of that in that video. And as I mentioned, custom assertions and Java libraries, you'll have to create a custom image of the API gateway and load that into your own image repository. It stopped working. Where's the? Oh, there we go. No. Okay. Okay. So Helm is a Kubernetes package manager. If you're running on something like Debian, you can think of it like APT. If you're on one of the Red Hat family, if you're on the Red Hat family, you can think of it as like DNF or Yum. Basically, from a vendor perspective, we know what the gateway needs to run in Kubernetes. So we prepare a set of templates. Templates. These are parameterized templates. And as a customer, you provide a set of values, so a simple configuration file. And the ending result is a set of Kubernetes manifests that's going to go into Kubernetes and Kubernetes is going to take that desired state and it's going to make it reality by giving you a gateway deployment, giving you the relevant services and any other anything else that you've defined from your values file. So you might not want to have you might not want to have usernames and passwords configured in your values.yaml file. So from a Helm chart perspective, we also give you the ability to reference existing config and secrets in your values.yaml file, so you don't have to specify any usernames or passwords there. Those get taken into the templates, and Kubernetes handles referencing those during deploy time and during runtime for the containers themselves. For additional bundles, so gateway bundles, RESTBand bundles, you can store those as config secrets. You can also keep them stored in KMS solutions like HashiCorp Vault and reference them in your values.yaml file. So if you were looking at running the gateway in ephemeral mode, then you would have a set of either config map secrets or a combination of the two, and as a result, you would get a purpose-built gateway that handled a very specific task from a MySQL-backed database. You can always guarantee that a set of policy is going to be available on the gateway by making sure that you're mounting the right stuff to it. Your existing CI/CD processes and tool chains, because in the MySQL world, will continue to work because you have access to that database for persistence. So just to sort of summarize what I've said there, you're getting simplified gateway configuration. So everything is driven through that singular configuration file. You've got separation of duty. So each release can be maintained independently with its own configuration. So Helm separates releases by release name. So you have a separation of duty for each of those releases. Helm and kubectl are both CLI tools. So those can be integrated with CI/CD toolchains or workflows. There's configurable autoscaling. So Kubernetes gives us that for free. So we take advantage of it and allow you to configure horizontal pod autoscalers. And also, if you're not looking at doing a migration, a transition, so migration, an expansion, or greenfield project, just getting a non-prod or a test environment up and running is fast and simple using the Gateway Helm chart versus a virtual appliance or other mediums. So just a quick note on the network topology. So the Gateway Helm chart has a production values.yaml file that gives us a basic recommendation of a recommended network topology. So with the Gateway Helm chart, you get an ingress resource, a traffic service, your gateway cluster, and a management service. So this represents a basic recommended way of doing things. This is not the only way you can do things. So if you have different use cases, that can all be configured. So most customers that we have conversations with have a central or shared ingress controller. This is also something we're considering as a role for the gateway in the future. But for the time being, an ingress controller is going to represent an ingress point into your network from an external source. So you're going to be able to configure an ingress resource, and that's something that external users are going to be able to access your APIs and services via. For internal users, you might have different ports that you want to expose in this traffic service. You might have different protocols, stuff like FTP, SFTP, and so on. They're going to be able to access that from a traffic service perspective. So the final thing is policy manager users. So as anyone that's used the container gateway is aware, policy manager requires a stateful connection. So we have a PM tag, a service that now runs as part of the Gateway Helm chart, and that makes sure that you always have a stateful connection to a policy manager node. So something else that we have from a Gateway Helm chart perspective is the ability to configure ports at both the container level and an application level. So as mentioned, by default, there's port 8443 and port 9443. 8443 is restricted to publish service message input only. So you don't have any management access on that 8443 port, and that's going to be available to external users coming in. Obviously, that can be updated and changed. You can add additional ports, and they just get configured here. So for the management service, you can specify ports that you want to run, and that's going to be available to internal users only, depending on how you configure it. So this is not the only way to configure this. This is just a recommendation, and it gives you all the tools that you need to be able to configure something that that makes sense and is kind of similar to what you would have with the appliance gateway. So finally, I just wanted to go through a very, very basic migration process. As I mentioned, this is not the only way to go through a migration. Instead of cloning a database, you might look at doing something like a full export through RESTman or in the future Graphman. But cloning the database is going to apply to most deployments of the API gateway. It guarantees that you get everything from a policy and configuration standpoint. So that cloned database is something that you would use when you configure the gateway Helm chart. Configure prerequisites. So if you're using custom assertions, additional Java libraries, you're going to need to create a custom gateway image. So that's going to be the next step. You're then going to configure your gateway Helm chart. So updating the image to point at your custom image, updating the JDBC URL to go to the correct database. A very simple Helm install command. Configure DNS. So you'll have to update your DNS configuration to point at the new gateway deployments, and finally, functional and load testing to make sure everything works as expected. So this is something that would not happen overnight, but it's something that would be done in parallel with your on-prem environment. So it would never be a quick, so it would never be kind of an overnight switch. It would be something to be to do in your parallel environments, with the ending result being a DNS switch or turning off the other environments. So with that, I've given you a very quick intro into the differences between the appliance and container gateways, an introduction into the gateway Helm chart, and a very, very simple look into what a migration process could be. Are there any questions?
Sure. Hello, sorry, I do have one quick question. When you said about having to recreate an image if you want to have different Java library, or sorry, Java custom assertions and things, how about just a mounted mount point that you can actually have on there to actually contain those? So you don't have to, manage another image, but have a mount point that is sitting there for that point that overlays on top of the actual gateway image. Is that okay?
Yeah, so that's a good question. For custom assertions, we don't go into directories in the custom assertions folder. It's all sort of in that directory only. So if you create a mount point or a shared volume, so with an init container, for example, which you can do, it'll overwrite that directory. So it'll remove all of the assertions in that folder.
Okay.
So we are looking at potentially creating a shared volume to load those items into, and then we can script the
copy command.
We can script the copy command to get them into the right place. But as for the shared volume at the moment, it's not really something that is going to work as you might expect it would. So that's why the most repeatable way to do it at the moment is creating that custom image.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions in the room? Yes.
I'm not a Kubernetes expert. We are currently moving our websites to the cloud, to Azure Cloud. And the question would be, have you tested this procedure with Azure Cloud or just with on-premise Kubernetes?
So this process is, I guess, kind of a logical walkthrough to the most simplistic way to do this. I mean, this is something that's going to take a long time to go through. I guess, especially the testing side of things, making sure everything works as expected. In terms of running the container gateway, so Azure Kubernetes is one of the, or AKS is one of the platforms that we do test against. There will be more in the future, I think. Yeah, so there'll be more in the future, but AKS is definitely one of the platforms that we test. From a migration perspective, it kind of depends on where you're migrating from. but they do have a database solution that works really well. So you should be able to go through a similar process in that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent. Other questions in the room? I've seen one question online, which is basically, can we share the slides with the audience?
Yes, yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll make sure we do that. One other question? Sorry. Let me see. So how about OpenShift support?
So we do have customers that are currently running in OpenShift. So OpenShift, I think 4.x runs directly on Kubernetes. So there are some idiosyncrasies with OpenShift. The way that the gateway runs, there shouldn't be any issues running on OpenShift. If there are, then raise a support ticket and we can take a look at it and try and help you to deploy on OpenShift. We are also looking at a layer 7 Kubernetes operator as a community project. So that's going to be available relatively soon. I haven't included that in today's presentation just on the basis of time. But if you want to have a conversation about that, then that's something that we can look to set up at a later date.
And I think a follow-up question, which I'm not exactly sure I get, but maybe you get it, which is end use of the OP operator.
So I just mentioned the
Open platform.
open platform. Yeah. So at a base level, from a support perspective, our statement is on 122. That pertains to the version that's been most recently tested. We then have a support statement on 122 and newer from a base level. So that kind of covers the majority of different platforms. The supported component is the container gateway, not necessarily where it's running.
Thank you. I think with clarification, the question was about Kubernetes operator.
Yeah. So the Kubernetes, the Kubernetes operator is currently a communities project. There's a couple of things that I need to do to make that public. That should be public this week, if not early next week, as a starting point. It is going to remain a communities project, so it probably falls into the experimental side of the model that Aaron was talking about earlier. Yes. Yeah. I can update the deck with that link as well if you'd like to take a look at that office hours.
That'll be great. Exactly. And one more question, which is what are topics to look at in terms of securing the container gateways running inside the Kubernetes from your perspective?
So security in context of Kubernetes itself, or security in the context of APIs and containers?
I would think the containers running inside the Kubernetes.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at that from a networking perspective, maybe. So you can use stuff like Istio if you're looking at making sure that you've got TLS, mutual TLS between the different things running on your Kubernetes cluster. From a container perspective, I mean, you can scan containers, you can sort of catalog what's available and so on. But yeah, I think if there's a bit more context to the question, I could maybe answer it a bit better.
Right. Okay. No, thank you. And I think the last question for now is to what extent are the resellers of Layer 7 API Gateway prepared to support the migration to container infrastructure?
So the resellers.
Yeah. So I guess we.
Yeah.
As a Peter, and in which case I'm happy to answer that question, of course, which is I think we have lots of experience in helping customers move to containerized environments. I think one of the most high profile projects exactly will be the next presentation that we'll be hearing about in a second, right? But yeah, I think ourselves as well as other partners of Broadcom around the globe, I think have gone through a number of migration projects with the help of Broadcom. Aaron, you want to add to that? hot off the press. Interesting. I don't know that yet.
So part of our focus on the cloud journey and the container gateway will be to be doing a few workshops in Vancouver within the next. No one needs to see me. It's fine. Within the next few months, and one of those will be specifically for partners. So we want to make sure that everyone has the same message, everyone has the same understanding, and everyone knows how to do that journey as well as they can for the customers. So yeah, I think there are some
Perfect.
people that are ahead of the curve, but we want to make sure that we enable as many as we can.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Aaron.
I just want to quickly add, so to your point, or to the question on partner support and so on. So we also work very closely with our partners. So if there are questions that come from partners on specific projects and so on, we do work closely with partners to try and resolve those. And I also didn't mention that so this is not a very exhaustive presentation given 20 minutes. So we are putting together as well, or plan to put together a video series covering more advanced use cases for transitioning between appliance and container gateway as well. And we'll cover some more advanced topics on that as well.
All right, and then we have, I think, one more question, actually on the speaker from Ramiro Pimentel. Please go ahead. Ramiro, I think we can hear you. You just need to unmute your line there. Does that work? Okay, not sure that's working. So if you have a question, I mean, would you mind just typing it into the chat? That'll be great, and we'll come back to that later. In which case, all right? Okay, so with that, let me thank you again, Gary, for that presentation, and I think it's a nice lead into the last presentation from customers today, and I'm really glad that we have our colleagues from William Hill who are joining us today, talking about basically their journey and a very successful project. The session will be presented jointly by Vince from Apida, who's a principal architect with Apida, and Carlos Pimentel, cloud architect from William Hill. So I think, Vince, you're going to start, right?
Yeah, I can start. Can we have my presentation, please? Excellent. Thank you very much. Come on, Carlos, you can come over here now anyway. But yeah, that's not going to work, is it? Yeah, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so yeah, a bit scary, I'm afraid, the photos, but yeah, so as Armin just said, I'm actually from Apida, but I used to work for William Hill. I joined Apida about 3 years ago, and I was key to a lot of the work that we're going to talk about, which was leading up to going to cloud beforehand and actually helping advise at the time. So, Carlos?
Yeah, that's me. I've been working in different companies, telecommunication wise, and also IT. And about 5 years, I joined William Hill and I started straight away to work with the APIs, the APIs solutions. So since then, I've been a key in the company working with that.
Thank you. Oh, look, I don't know if I did that. But, yeah, so enough about us, about William Hill. Slightly oldish slide, but it's okay. Many people might not know, but in the UK, William Hill is a very large bookmaker, sports betting and gaming company, founded in 1934 in Leeds by William Hill, 16,000 employees, recently purchased by 888, which you'll see in a minute. And lots of retail offices throughout the UK, online offices in many, many different countries now. It's probably more than 8 since 888 has taken over. And William Hill uses many, many Broadcom CA products. So let's have a look if this is going to work. Excellent. Okay, so history. About 10 years, William Hill has been using the Layer 7 API gateway. Aaron was very key to that, I believe. He told me earlier today. It started with just 3 virtual appliances, and then due to key events, it just increased up to about 56 in production, plus all the pre-production and development machines. Problem is, it was hard to maintain, and patching and migration because of all the amount of clusters, the different clusters that we had to have. It was run by migration was done by unsupported ESM still, and a bit of GMU, which was highly inefficient for the many different clusters that were there. And obviously there were many classic portals because the synchronization for API keys had to go between each separate cluster. It was a mix of badly written V1 APIs because every man and his dog was able to write an API. So it was very, very messy, apart from a few very well written V2 APIs using the framework, which William Hill has on there. Performance though was very good. Even though we scaled horizontally, it proved itself in the Grand National in 2017 with about 11,000 requests per second. See a spike on here. I've got a little laser here. How does that work? I'm not going to play. But yeah, you know, there's the Grand National, which is the pinnacle race in the UK in the horse racing scene. It's one single race once a year, and every man and his dog basically puts a bet on. Grandma puts a bet, everybody puts a bet. So that's a really high key event. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Anyway, for William Hill, they came to us and they said, right, the primary requirement is remove all William Hill API systems from the current on-prem, right, into AWS. That was the primary goal. Everything goes into AWS. They want to allow scaling for key events, ease of API version management. So I've got a bit of a mess in my presentation there. Whilst we're at it, we need to upgrade to V10. We need to go from version 3.5 portal to version 4 or 5. Make sure it's seamless to all the customers and consumers. Split the gaming and sports verticals, because let's say during a key event, you can have the gateways go down because you've got so much traffic going through them. Well, that affects the other business vertical, which is the sports, which they don't care about that, and they're upset that happens on that day quite often. So we had to split that. And obviously another shiny new framework, which is designed about the cloud infrastructure. You'll hear a bit more about that later. Next slide, please. So considerations for this. I looked at AWS native gateway because obviously they want to go to AWS. I had to look at it to see if that was possible. Now, the problem was, you know, because there were so many billions of requests per year anyway, it was just too high. The cost of AWS is per request, and it was really high. And also it didn't provide enough orchestration. So middleware code, Lambda code was needed. It would just take lots of more developers, and everybody would be writing their own thing again and just getting messy. So I decided not to go that direction. All the other form factors of Layer 7 were considered, you know, including the AMI images and obviously Kubernetes containers, which won. 4.5 developer portal, obviously make sure that we managed to be able to migrate all the keys over. That was the main thing. And also, obviously the V10 gateway we had to have because that had to be upgraded. And obviously API lifecycle, which we needed to work very closely with William Hill to actually get, you know, get their requirements, because their gateway setup is really quite complex, and it was quite challenging for our API gateway manager to handle this. So yeah, we worked very closely with them and helped give them just the right product. And the APIDA API Service Manager, which is actually the gateway framework that I'm going to be talking about, just on and off. Thank you. We're probably restricted for time, so this is just a very general diagram of how it's set up within AWS, separate Kubernetes clusters with MySQL 8, APIDA API Gateway Manager, and the gateway is all in there. Nothing particular fancy there. Connected to Git, and also has the existing the syslog facility, which is Splunk. Okay. Right, do you want to talk about this a bit?